Welcome to Building Better, the series where I iterate and improve on my life and talk about what I've learned or already know. Today we're going to talk about skill development and how to learn complex topics. Let's get started. There's a lot of misinformation online about effective learning and skill acquisition, and there are as many ways to learn how to do something as there are people. So the focus of this video is going to be on the particular rules, models, and tools that I've found have the most yield for me. Your mileage may vary, but this is broad enough to apply to anyone. Rule 1: read the documentation. Nobody learns everything alone. The internet is the most vast library ever constructed, and it's up to you to differentiate between useless and useful information. The tutorial is the most basic form of onboarding available for any given skill, but its return also diminishes immediately, sometimes within the runtime. More useful on nearly all levels are examples and practice. There's a reason for this, and it's something we'll talk about in just a moment, but the important thing right now is that whenever you start to pick something up, you read the documentation. Well-written documentation provides examples, test cases, and the requisite knowledge necessary to engage with a topic on a deeper level, all in a consistent tone and format. This ability to engage the practitioner is the defining characteristic of well-written documentation, and if you pay attention, you can hone your ability to recognize it. There's a kind of resonance, a flow to the process of learning if you're working with a good teacher or well-structured source. It clicks, and the more you read, the better you become at interfacing with these instructors. Rule 2: Composition, not inheritance. The laws of reality limit us to only one direction along one temporal dimension. Our communication, lectures, recordings, textbooks are all similarly bound. Our minds are not so limited, though. Your brain thinks in multiple dimensions with no concept of time beyond how you label it. But it's easy to not realize or utilize this fact since all information you ever consumed was given to you linearly. My biggest bugbear here is the file directory. The idea that all information can be cleanly divided into categories and subcategories is fundamentally wrong. Programmers run face first into this wall with object oriented programming, a paradigm that insists you package every function of code into strictly defined classes that inherit behaviors and traits from another class, which then inherit from another class above them, and so on and so forth. This is called inheritance, and it is infinitely frustrating to implement. So, what's the alternative? Composition is the practice of assembling functionalities into a singular class from whatever libraries and interfaces are strictly necessary for a given class. It saves space, performance, and provides flexibility in implementation and upkeep. Similarly, the information stored in your brain is composed, not inherited, and the more you know, the more you can learn. It's like a graph of interconnected nodes, and the number of connections that any given node has increases its lifetime. A more interconnected graph is more likely to latch onto new ideas and frame them in ways that are intuitive and useful. Rule 3: Periodize for progress. In my current stage of life, I can't afford to be a jack of all trades. I don't mean this in the sense that I need to discard my hobbies and skills wholesale, but that I can definitely afford to maintain these skills instead of pushing them further. In sports science, this process of selectively focusing on certain muscle groups or physical qualities while placing all others on maintenance is called periodization. The point is to direct the body's resources so that one muscle group can progress beyond what it otherwise could. It's easier to maintain muscle or cardiovascular capacity than to gain it, so a well constructed periodized training routine can get results far exceeding that of a generalist routine. We can do the same thing for our knowledge and skills. It's still possible to make progress on multiple projects at the same time, but it'll generally be slower than if only a handful of items were fully prioritized. Focusing on what's immediately relevant and maintaining everything else will generally yield the best results over a long time span. With our rules in place, we can look at the models we'll be using to guide our learning. Model 1: Bloom's Taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy is a classification of information work ordered by complexity. Bloom's taxonomy becomes actionable with the introduction of cognitive load theory, which attempts to explain how information is encoded into knowledge in the brain. The crux of the theory is that engaging with information in a way that's more demanding increases the chance that it sticks around in your head. Flashcards and training wheels quickly lose their utility as you improve. Your methods of practice and training should similarly evolve as you progress, becoming more demanding and intensive if you want to keep improving at a similar rate. The taxonomy goes like this. Remembering lies at the base, with recognition and recall being the markers. These are low effort, low retention, and low application examples of knowledge work. Following that is understanding, which is characterized by the ability to summarize, infer, and interpret information. Then it's application, which is characterized by implementing and executing on plans and projects. Analysis and evaluation are closely related, based on the ability to organize and critically interface with information. Finally, at the top of the taxonomy is creation, which in many ways involves every level below it. The thing about Bloom's taxonomy is that engaging with higher levels forces your brain to also engage the lower levels of thinking to basically the same effect. This taxonomy and its principles explain why programming is best learned through projects and active problem solving. Nobody spends more than a day on syntax because it doesn't actually teach you what needs to get done. This holds for basically every field of information that exists. The exact ratios are different, but the core of effective learning is engagement with synthesis of information and challenging practice. There's a sweet spot you're looking for, and of the three kinds of cognitive load, you only really care about germane and intrinsic load, since those facilitate learning. Model 2, the ATSP hierarchy. The ATSP hierarchy was developed by the Pioneer to model how skills and proficiencies can be developed. Attributes are the foundation of the hierarchy, encompassing the characteristics of your mind and body that enable traits, which are behavior and action oriented. Traits allow for skills, which are complex patterns of behavior or ability, and multiple skills compose proficiencies, which are really fields of practice. The hierarchy's effectiveness is in its ability to enable the reverse engineering of desired skills and practices. It's bidirectional too, letting you start from any level and work towards any other. The proceduralization of knowledge removes barriers to entry and friction from starting any learning process, which is the greatest strength of the ATSP hierarchy. Incident reviews are present in a lot of professional spaces to address small mistakes and catastrophic failures alike, but I'm a programmer, so let's try to adapt the process from software to real life. A good incident review consists of four things: a description, a timeline, a root cause analysis, and changes that need to be implemented. Your incident report doesn't need to be particularly formal. I like my timelines here to be based not in time, but a series of triggers and events. The root cause analysis will always be the most difficult part of an incident review. The five whys are a common method for tunneling down to a root cause, but it can be very easy for your mind and ego to mislead you. I recommend voicing questions and answers for your five whys in terms of actions and motivations. Save your internal pondering for a journal. The point of the incident review is to critically learn from mistakes in a way that's not more emotionally charged than it needs to be. The exact methodology is subjective, so feel free to experiment with different frameworks. Let's move on to the tools now. Tool 1: Personal documentation. It's impossible to know where you're going without knowing where you are, and it's impossible to know how far you've come without knowing where you've been. Personal documentation captures snapshots of your thinking and what has worked for you in the past. Learning is an iterative process, and it's more useful to keep a log of previous iterations that you can return to than to wipe them clean entirely. You can keep these notes in any platform with any number of organizational systems, but I have a number of recommendations. First, Obsidian. It's fast, customizable, and works with a universal file format. Plugins, in-depth searches, and fully custom properties make Obsidian my note-taking app of choice. It's even the presentation software of choice for phenomenal YouTubers like No Boilerplate, but more importantly, me. Within an Obsidian Vault, I recommend the Para method of organization, a system that sorts information by actionability into projects, areas, resources, and archives. Projects have deadlines, areas are indefinite, resources are flexible, and archives are finished. The utility of Para is that it makes no claims of permanence. The information is supposed to move from folder to folder as the need arises. Tool 2: Interconnected Notes. Where the Para method is a database level organizational method, Zettelkasten allows for emergent organization as the notes build connections with each other. Notes in a Zettelkasten system are individual, with references to each other building out the network. Obsidian is your friend here, with directional links, embed functionality, and a graph view making the process easy, clear, and highly motivating. I try to mind the nature of these connections between notes. I keep four kinds of relevant connections in my notes: seeds for whatever concepts inspired or preceded the current one, derivatives for extensions of the concept, parallels for similar ideas in different areas of life, and nuances for seemingly contradictory concepts. This model has given me a richly connected vault of ideas that relate to one another all across my various hobbies and interests. This principle of interconnectivity extends beyond the written medium. There's a concept in learning called interleaving, where the application of a concept in different contexts with other skills can more strongly encode it in the mind than through rote repetition. Having interconnected notes can facilitate the process of interleaving, but doesn't actually make up for it. So the important thing is to be broad in your learning and to apply variation where possible. Tool 3, Visual Note Taking. Interconnectivity adds a layer of nonlinearity to notes, making them more closely resemble how the brain encodes information. Visual note taking goes a step beyond this, making the note itself nonlinear. We want to make mind maps, and my tool of choice here is the Excalidraw plugin for Obsidian, which can be rendered and read as text or a drawing. It's this functionality, the ability to change between text and visual, that we can leverage. YouTuber Nicole Vanderhoven did a set of videos talking about how exactly to implement this page flipping functionality into our notes, and I highly recommend you watch it. But for now, we'll talk about how to take visual notes. Mind maps are very easy to mess up, to cram with meaningless detail, but what we want to do is to imply the detail in how concepts are grouped and the directionality, shape, and color of arrows. The value of a mind map is not necessarily in how it can be recalled, that's for the text side of a note, but in how it clearly communicates the mental processes going on while studying. With that, we have a set of rules and models to guide our learning and a toolbox for effective note taking. Learning is a personal process, so please iterate and develop your own learning systems. There's still a lot to be said about how to read, how to absorb a lecture, and how to revise your own notes, but those can make up their own video. That is nearly everything I know in a broad overview. Join us in another 4 weeks for the next installment of Building Better.